Welcome to the Animus podcast. I am Aftermath, and I am joined today by professional AC podcaster extraordinaire, Loomer.
Hello, hey, super professional Loomer here. Oh, I'm happy to be here and honored to be the first guest of this new format.
Since we last talked, you have completed Shadow of Mordor on stream, completed Freedom Cry, completed a tribute to Shao Jun, in which you fixed the horrendously bad Ezio clone in the original Chronicles China, played through Far Cry 4, created a new channel trailer, interviewed Richard Faris, the lead writer on Rogue, announced your new AC pilgrimage to Paris, went to Paris, finished Uncharted 1 and 2, played through Syndicate on stream and did massive amounts of side missions while you were at it, interviewed Jeffrey Harland, the lead writer on Syndicate, while also doing many smaller one-off streams, and most recently interviewing Kotaku's editor-in-chief, Stephen Totilo. All that as a hobby, while also launching the project that you've been working on as a job, YouTube Gaming. How do you manage to do so much stuff? Is there some kind of crazy work ethic or time management trick that you have?
No, I mean, my time is completely split between, like, my day job stuff, and then when I come home, I stream and work on videos and spend time with Candace, and that's my life. Like, there's nothing else. You got to cut out a lot of other things. I see my friends like once a month or something like that. So that's pretty much where all the time comes from. I wish I had more time to do more videos. Like, I was hoping to have all the pilgrimage stuff from Paris out by now, and I haven't even really started. I'm going to do that over the holiday break. But yeah, it's pretty nuts.
So I'd like to touch on that second to last part real quick.
Sure.
1 week ago, you sat down with Stephen Totilo to talk about his time with AC and a few of his recent articles and the actions of Kotaku in relation to AC. Now, if I do say so myself, that was quite the ballsy act on your part, and I absolutely loved it. You handled it brilliantly, and while I do not harbour any will to Stephen on a personal level, it's been made very evident that many people do harbour some ill will to Stephen on a personal level. From how you spoke to him in the episode itself to the inclusion of that note in the description and removing personal attacks from the comments, it showed that you handled it in what I would say was as best you could. So I suppose the question would be, what made you decide to bring him on? Because he's not exactly your usual podcast guest.
Yeah, so the podcast probably makes a little bit more sense if you know that I was talking to him about it before he wrote that A Price of Games journalism article. And so at that point, like, it just hadn't really been talked about at all, really, since the leak of AC Victory back before. And I wanted to, and so it might seem a little redundant because some of the stuff we talk about is kind of covered in his piece, like he had laid out his side. I have absolutely no idea if me and him talking about doing this inspired him to write the piece first, or if it was totally, not even a consideration in that respect. But it just, I don't know. I had just been, Stephen, I had found out, he spends time on, like, the subreddit and everything. I've known for a while, like, from his articles and everything, that he is a big AC fan. And it's like I kind of alluded to in the podcast really briefly, but I really, Kotaku, I have kind of like a love-hate relationship sometimes, because the problem is, like, I think most of their articles are great. And a lot of times they put out some really, really cool stuff that you won't find anywhere else. And especially in the realm of Assassin's Creed, because Steven's such a big fan, you get these articles, you get some of the best AC articles on the game's news sites from Kotaku, I think. One example being, like, he's one of the only people to write about Ezio's voice changing in Chronicles China. He did the thing, like I mentioned this in the podcast, but he commissioned the piece where it's like, okay, they're selling $100 worth of there's a $100 option of microtransactions in Unity. What happens if you actually buy that? Can you actually spend it all? And it's like, no, you can't. And it's
I didn't even know that. I actually hadn't seen the article personally until you mentioned it on the podcast, which is crazy to me.
And it's good because I think it also balances out. There's I think it's Luke Plunkett, I think is his name. I think he's generally a fan of AC, maybe not as much as Steven, but then, like, most of the other people that they get for the AC articles are, like, really cynical about it. And it's like, kind of like the type of people, right? And there's nothing against them. But I think it's good because then that represents, like, a broad range of opinions. And starting at least with AC3, they would do kind of like roundtable discussions from the different points of view, and I like that. And one other thing I didn't mention on the podcast that I liked was, I think it was Steven or someone else that came back to AC3 afterwards, and they're like, if you go and do all of the homestead stuff with Connor, like his character is so much more developed, and it's this totally optional thing. And I've argued for a while that a lot of people and or like games journalists that like reviewed the game or whatever and had such a shitty opinion of him probably just skipped over a lot of the Homestead stuff. In which case, makes way more sense to me. And so I've really appreciated like the work he's done for it too. But at the same time, I really disagreed like with the AC Victory leak and the Unity leak. But the Victory is obviously the bigger one of the two. And so as you heard on the podcast a while ago, he's into the series enough that he'll actually look around, like he'll read stuff on the AC subreddit.
Yeah, I've seen him around on the AC subreddit quite a bit,
which is crazy to me a little bit.
Yeah, and it's I don't want anyone to think that he's just on there defending Kotaku, because that's what he was doing in the A Price of Games journalism article. But he has jumped onto things that, like, I was talking to someone early on when Syndicate was first announced, and like he had heard some other news somewhere, and so he mentioned that, and it was completely unrelated to Kotaku. So he's actually like a regular user there. I really like him.
Yeah, and if you can't tell, like from the actual podcast episode I did with him, like I talked to him just like I talked to like you or like about Assassin's Creed stuff. He's just like it's like exactly the same as talking to all the other super fans in the series. I think that's really awesome. And so he had when I did the interview with Yves Guillemot, he saw that on the subreddit or somewhere else, and he reached out and said like, hey, this was really he and Patrick, I forget how to say his last name, both like reached out and said like, hey, like this was a really cool interview, like props for holding them to the thing where Laurent Detox had said that they would delay an Assassin's Creed if they needed to. And I kind of asked Yves, like, so he said that in 2013, and then so what's up with not delaying Unity when it clearly needed to be delayed, you know? And then like, it can be a tough line to. They were talking a little bit about like how it can be a tough line to walk to ask a question like that, but try not to be insulting, but like you know what I mean, right? Like there's a very fine balance in asking a question like that can be kind of tricky to get right. Where you don't want to, you can very easily come off as really harsh or like really like a dick, but you also want to just be like, hey, let's honestly talk about this. Anyway, and then later on when I did the Ezio Chronicles China thing, we chatted a bit about that, and he ended up writing an article for Kotaku about that, and so we got some quotes. So we've been in touch a little bit, and I was like, oh, like I'm in touch with Steven already, and like we clearly have kind of like a mutual admiration for each other's work in a way, and like he's a really nice guy. And I was like, maybe I wonder if he would be interested in chatting about like Assassin's Creed and of course the Victory thing. And I really just wanted to get inside his head a little bit and understand the reasoning, because it was just such a conflicted. The Victory leak was such a conflicted thing for me because as a whole, I think Steven's a great person, like in general. Like he's smart, and like he and I seem to agree, like based on the articles I read, like we seem to hold like very similar views of like the franchise and everything. And like I just this thing we disagree so much on this one subject, the whether or not it should have been leaked, but they should have published it, that I was like, I just had a lot of conflict in my head on, just kind of reconciling someone who is a big fan of the series, Steven, and if that even has any impact on a decision like that, but also just like like, is this actually a thing that he's obligated to do? Because, like when we talk about it, he's like, oh, like if they give me this information, I'm obligated to share it with my readers. And I disagree with that.
That was something I definitely noticed, was that he definitely says that Kotaku aren't leaking it. The Ubisoft employee that emailed them is leaking it.
So to be fair, like the ultimate blame does lie in that employee, right? Like that person's like an absolute asshole. But in lieu of being able to get that person on my podcast, I am going to talk to Steven about his part in it, because he still made the decision to publish it, and they did get a lot of clicks on it, even though that's not their lifeblood or whatever, right? And it really brought back to mind a little bit Gizmodo paying for the iPhone 4 a little bit in 2011. I think it was 2011, before it was released. They're also part of the Gawker network, right? And, that guy had shopped it around to some other sites, and there were some ethical issues there where they're like, we're not going to, like, no, this is wrong. This is basically lost/stolen property. This is a different case in that it wasn't like lost or anything. This is some guy just like, or guy or girl, I don't even know, like who just decides to screw over their team and send it out. But it's just like there were just a lot of questions in my head, and I thought it was very easy for me and a lot of other people to just react very with a very broad strokes. And I think I even said that I was just like, fuck Kotaku, like this is bullshit. They're doing it for the clicks. But then like as I've gotten older and everything. I'm like 30, by the way, for people who don't know. Like, I'm actually pretty old.
We talked about that last time, actually, because you're immortal.
Yeah. But like, as I've gotten older, and like one of the things that I've really kind of tried to latch onto, and that I think is part of like maturing, is trying not to see things so much in these buckets of like black and white and like right and wrong type things, and that maybe empathizing with other sides a little more, and like knowing the little bit that I had already known about Steven. I just wanted to get a more nuanced, like, kind of picture than just being like, oh, fuck Kotaku, they did it for the clicks. Because to me, it's clear that, like, even if that's my initial reaction when I first saw it, it's like there's more going on than that. And so it's just trying to get, like, capture the other side a little bit and have a little bit of a debate about the ethics of leaking something like this, because like you don't really see it in a lot of other entertainment mediums. We kind of got into some of these topics a little bit deeper originally, but I ended up cutting about 20 minutes out of the podcast just because it was a little bit of circular arguments here and there. It was a lot of cruft, and like I tried to streamline it down a lot.
A lot of people thought that you were getting a bit riled up in the
podcast
itself.
Well, it's hard for me not to get riled up because I think it's really, I still really just, I mean, I understand his side a lot more now. I still disagree with it, but like I understand it more. But it still just really upsets me that, because at the end of the day, I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm really necessarily on. If you try to split this up into sides or whatever, I'm not really on Ubisoft's side. I don't know if I'm really on the fan side. Like what I care, I'm on the brand side. Mm-hmm. Like I want this brand and series to be the best that it can be, because when this series is at its peak, like there is just nothing like it to me. It's just so wonderful. I love it. And so I want to like encourage that like as much as possible. And that's kind of what drives most of the things I do fundamentally, more so than necessarily fighting for like the fans or Ubisoft side or anything like that. It's really all about kind of just making this brand fulfill the potential that I know it has. And like it just really upsets me just that to see all these people react to Victory, to the leak in the midst of all these Unity bugs and everything, and they're just so cynical and jaded. And like we talked about this in the podcast. Like Steven was like, "Oh, I think people came away with it from that leak pretty optimistic. They were building something on Unity." And I was like, "What did you read?"
And, yeah,
like,
you read off the first comments on the site.
Yeah, because I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't say it like that, but in my head, I'm like, what? Like, the vast majority of this was like, nobody was happy about this. Like, everybody was super cynical and jaded because they're like, oh yeah, like Unity's fucking broken and they're just cranking them out still. And I'm just like, fuck you guys. Like, you do not, like, it's just, it really pisses me off to see the reaction that it kind of, and that's part of what I talked about with them, because it's like I said, I think Ubisoft, like there's so many factors that go into these games that it's so unfair to judge the next one, and in some ways kind of maybe even have an effect on how well it sells, based on something that isn't even representative of the product, it felt like it wasn't giving. I really do think video games are art, and like in that whole debate or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just really like the art. It's really unfair to the art to do something like this, like especially with the nature of the footage itself. And then leaking it so early, it really, really upsets me. And so I tried to rein it back a little, but I'm obviously like, as I get passionate about things, and so it's going to come out a little bit in the interview. But it's nothing. It's another thing I've learned is really good to try to remember, like as I've been growing up and everything, is also like in situations like this, it's not. as long as I try to keep it more like you disagree and attack like the decision and not the person. And this applies a lot when like we're talking about Ubisoft stuff too. Like try to really avoid saying stuff like, "Oh, whoever designed this mission can fuck off and like get fired," or like something, or you know what I mean? Yeah. Like you try not to do that. You just say like, "Oh man, like this." Like I really don't like how they ended up designing this mission. There could have been any number of factors in that, and so I was really trying to like attack the decision and like, and try to see it from the other side and try to just get a more nuanced, like complete picture of what was going on there. Like I said, this makes more sense when you realize that other article hadn't been written yet. I didn't know it was going to be written, but I think it still ended up being a pretty good discussion, and hopefully. The people who listen to it, even if they don't change their minds, even like, I didn't change my mind on my opinion on it, but like you at least get a big, the bigger picture a little bit. And you understand it's not as simple as them just being like, oh, we're going to leak this and make a ton of money. I really don't think that's the case. And I was really grateful that Steven was willing to come on and chat. He's really great person to chat to. The part where we disagree is he sees this as like this fundamental like journalistic principle, and I see it as this isn't like the Pentagon Papers.
There were people like it was interesting because Colin Moriarty.
This guy who's leaking stuff is not a whistleblower. He's an asshole.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Like Colin Moriarty, who is a game journalist on Twitter, he actually mentioned like someone actually a friend of mine on the subreddit Neo tweeted him, said, can you give it a single example of when leaking things was good? And he gave the example of the Pentagon Papers and,
oh my God,
and Deep Throat.
You have to be fucking out of your mind to not realize the difference between like an entertainment / art product and like national security, like fucking like constitutional, whatever. Like there's such a world of difference. And we kind of alluded to that. Like you can kind of hear, we did have a tiny discussion on that, but not really. Cause at that point I think Steve was actually getting a little like, why are we still talking about this? Like we've been talking about this for like half an hour. And then like edit it out. But you hear him at the end, the snippet that I cut out, he was talking about like, there is, it's a tricky situation because this is stuff that, people didn't, if you remember the exact quote is something along the lines of, he says, like, people didn't need to know this. And that's kind of taken from a really quick excerpt that I kind of snipped out for time reasons and because it was kind of rehashing arguments. But we were talking about, like, I'm like, this guy isn't Edward Snowden. Like, this guy or girl who leaked it isn't Edward Snowden. They're not like some constitutional hero. They're just a dick to their coworkers. Like, and so he's falling off of that and being like, yeah, like, arguably, like, people don't need to know this information as you would say of like Edward Snowden's NSA surveillance stuff, right? There's much stronger argument that people need to know about that because it violates a lot of constitutional rights, right? Like this is just like something that people love. It's a piece of art and entertainment. And he's like, so, there is some leeway. And so, I think there is room for arguing there and like pushing the discussion around. And so, yeah, that's like kind of what he's referring to actually, and I just
an interesting part of all this was that a lot of people actually identify the leaks with him in particular. Like personally, when I think of Kotaku leaking things, I think of the organization. I think of Kotaku. I don't think of Stephen Totilo. But it was interesting given how many people in the YouTube comments, on Twitter, on the subreddit, who were all like, oh my god, I can't believe you're talking to him. I assume there was some personal attacks which you removed. But like, it was interesting to me that people did that.
It's like 10 minutes before I got it. They're like, Loomer, are you an SJW? And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, where did this come from? We're talking about AC Victory stuff. But like, yeah, luckily there weren't too many. I was bracing myself worst case for like a ton of like Gamergate people just coming in and being like, whoa, like there's only actually a couple people that I just laughed and banned. But yeah, I think there's like kind of two aspects about Steven and this what you're talking about with Steven in this story where one thing I kind of forgot to mention, and I regret this a little bit, is that he didn't actually write that story. It was Jason Schreier, but of course I should have pointed this out, but the reason that we kind of talked as if he had written it, or it was because he's editor-in-chief, and ultimately it's his call on whether this goes out, right? And so I think it's okay that the way that the podcast still went out, but I want to point this out now as opposed to later. And I'm not sure exactly how that works, like how he, why Jason wrote it instead of him, like how that gets decided and everything. But one thing that also he brought up that I think was interesting for people to know is it is kind of like a small distinction, but, I think it does make a difference that it was somebody who basically like contacted them with this stuff and not them actively trying to get scoops. You know what I mean?
Um,
And so it makes more sense once you realize, once he says, like, if this information lands in our lap, we have to release it, but we're not going out there trying to get it. And it's like, okay, you can kind of understand like the journalistic principles he's working on more,
But
even if you disagree with them, like I do and a lot of other people do.
that's interesting, given that they published an article specifically telling leakers how to email them anonymously.
Oh yeah, there's aspects of this that we didn't really have time for on the podcast too. But like, I don't remember what it was. It was like, I think it was when Far Cry Primal was leaked by IGN, fucking Istanbul or something. Like, Turkey, yeah. IGN Turkey. Like, it's just the fucking randomest, like, whatever. But like, then they wrote their article about it, and they're like. And I just remember there being like this really superfluous like statement or two in there that was like, oh yeah, we had heard like something about like a primal, like a prehistoric Far Cry, but like couldn't confirm it in time. And I just read that. I'm like, okay, like, so like, why is this even a line in this thing? You guys are like kind of bragging about how you kind of knew about this, but then you couldn't like. It to me, it came off as like they were almost like, oh, we're trying to get like all these like, scoops for you guys. And we almost had this one, but we weren't quite able to publish it or something like that. And I'm like, just shut up and don't say anything about it. Like, like it's my opinion. So I think that kind of runs against that a little. Maybe it's just my interpretation based off the leaks and of AC games and everything. But like, there's definitely room for lots of different aspects of this to focus on. And there's one that we focused on a little bit where, he says they're obligated to share this information with the readers. And then the point I was trying to make that we didn't talk as much as I probably would have liked to on it is like, well, obviously you have to draw a line on what you share with them and how much. Like if someone gives you the ending to the game, you're not going to share that with your readers, right? Like they kept out the spoiler parts of Fallout 4. That was the other thing that they got blacklisted from, right? Was the script for Fallout 4, and they talk about how they didn't publish. They redacted like some of the spoilers or whatever. And I'm like, look, you're already in the process. You're already in the business of, whittling down this information to what you think is appropriate. And like my argument is that you didn't whittle enough down. And it's like, it's great that you didn't publish the entire 7-minute target footage, but you really shouldn't have even published like the screenshots and the like description that was pretty much the entire target footage anyway. Like if you have an obligation, if I would argue that it's an obligation to share like something much less, considering that it's target gameplay footage and not representative of the final game or what the finished game will be like. This is made at end of pre-production, start of production. Anyway, so, like there's so many different things you do on this.
One thing you guys actually didn't talk about very much. You mainly talked about the leaking and the act of leaking, whether it was right to leak it. But do you personally agree with Ubisoft blacklisting then?
Oh yeah, sorry, we didn't talk about the blacklisting at all because like I kind of wanted to focus more on just like the process of determining these types of things, making these kinds of decisions more so because I kind of got the impression that everybody's pretty much in agreement here that Ubisoft is well within their rights to do this. And personally, I 100% like I have zero sympathy for Kotaku being blacklisted. Like, I don't know what else they expected. They probably didn't expect it to be this long, I think. And it sucks. And Steven says, and even Steven's in agreement on this, right? He's like, I understand it. He's like, actually, the worst part, like the part that upsets me the most is just the fact that they won't, like, they literally don't talk to him anymore for anything about Assassin's Creed. When he's trying to confirm for these other stories. And while I agree that sucks for him, it's really just not so much. It makes a lot more sense for me. Well, I mean, it makes sense to me anyway, but like it's weird to call it like a blacklist when in reality, all it is not actively chatting with people who fuck you over. You know what I mean? It's not like they're obligated to give them information anyway or any. I don't know if this makes any sense, but like, it doesn't really feel like a blacklist to me. It's just like, okay, well, we're just not going to associate with you anymore, and it's not. I don't know. I mean, that is kind of a blacklist. I understand, but it's. Yeah. I have no sympathy for Kotaku, and so we didn't really talk about it because I think everybody agrees that Ubisoft is within their rights. It's more about whether or not they should have done it, and I didn't think there was much discussion to be had there. It's I was more interested in the thought process behind when you when you release information like this and how you draw the line on how much information, like the principles behind that and how you decide how much to leak and everything was more interesting to me.
Yeah, I have to definitely agree with you on the whole Ubisoft completely in the right, because everyone has to remember that Victory isn't the first time that Kotaku has leaked something. They've also leaked AC4, Unity, Rogue, Victory, and then they leaked Syndicate as well, just like days before the official announcement.
Yeah, so, like the actual name and everything. Yeah,
and the information on Jacob and Evie and.
Yeah, I mean the response to this in the community, I mean in the broader like games journalism and community has been mixed. It's not all been defending Kotaku. If you go to their comment section, they're like, "Oh yeah, stand up to Ubisoft and like Bethesda and whatever." But like, Penny Arcade was talking about like we don't really have sympathy for like I forget exactly what they said, but there was a Penny Arcade article about this that they're like it almost sounds like he's being some kind of martyr for games journalism, but in reality it's like, can you really blame a company for not wanting to talk to someone or for not wanting to talk to an outlet whose modus operandi is just start shit? And and that's exactly what I mean when I talk about this in context of a quote unquote blacklist. It's really just more like, what reason do they have to help this outlet that seems to have no respect for the art and the developers of this company? Like that's just a decision not to talk to them anymore, and I completely understand and support that. As at the same time as I'm trying to understand it from Kotaku's side. That's just what I was trying to get at. I was trying to take a complex view of a more nuanced and complex view of everything, and I don't know if that really came out that much in the podcast, but that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to represent kind of like my own conflicting view of this, that I feel like I'm getting pulled in different directions a little bit, even if I know on principle like where I stand. But I still trying to reconcile a bunch of things.
As I said, I thought you were very fair with it, and you did a great job at handling him, about handling the people in response to him being on and things like that.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out after thorough editing and cutting out some of the circular arguments. But yeah.
So now I think we can move on to a little less of a loaded topic. What did you think of Uncharted 1 and 2?
Oh my god, I love them. They're very. I think I said this before. The one thing that's kind of strange about them is how unabashedly film-like they are, and I don't really mean that like in a Metal Gear way, because like Metal Gear is like clearly inspired by a lot of film stuff, but it's still like Kojima has his own thing going on. These ones are like straight out of movies, but with like a little bit of meta commentary on them, and so. I really, really love them. At the same time, they feel a little, God, I don't know exactly how to describe it. They're really well executed, like mainstream games. You know what I mean? Like nothing like too daring.
Well, they are referred to as Indiana Jones, the game.
Yeah, very, very much like Indiana Jones, like very much like crowd pleasers and really well-written characters, great dialogue. I love all the characters. I love the dialogue, and the gameplay is pretty good. I imagine I would have been more impressed with it if I played that when they came out. But beautiful environments. I love the series. It's different from the stuff I would normally love a lot, though, because the stuff I normally love is stuff that pushes boundaries in ways that this one pushes boundaries, but more in kind of like a safe, like, let's see how much we can make an Indiana Jones movie into a game, and not like, how can we really explore the medium in interesting ways or do things that are really, I don't know. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that really take advantage of the medium, I think. So I am really excited to play Uncharted 3, and Uncharted 4 just looks insane. So I'm really enjoying it like I would a really good summer blockbuster movie that isn't trying to be like brainy or anything or too pushing the edge, but it's also not stupid,
So yeah, you'll be playing Uncharted 3 this Sunday, right? As someone is listening upon release this Sunday.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't imagine a lot of people really care much about the non-Assassin's Creed stuff I do, but if you want to see me play Uncharted 3, you're totally welcome to stop by that in my other live streams.
I'll be interested to hear what you think of that, because it's considerably more modern than 1 and 2.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of people like 2 more, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited for it.
I have heard incredibly split. It's very, very heated. Which one's better, 2 or 3? Personally,
Yeah.
I felt 2, but
Yeah, but then I see a lot of hipsters being like, "Well, I really do think 3 is the best in the series." Like, you know what I mean? Like, like, all right, well, we'll see how it goes.
did you play any of the Uncharted 4 multiplayer beta?
I did. I love it. It's really great, and I played a lot of the Last of Us multiplayer beta. Sorry, not beta. The Last of Us multiplayer, both on PS3 and PS4. I've gone through the entire multiplayer campaign, which really just means you play a certain number of matches. But I've done that like 2 or 3 times at least, which is not as much as some of the really hardcore like players out there when I see their like ranks and everything. But it's a lot of time. It's like probably 100, 200 hours or something. It's really crazy to go from that to the Uncharted multiplayer because they're both very, they're both made by Naughty Dog, but they both very much feel like their respective single players. Whereas, The Last of Us is very tense and
Slow.
it's all about slower paced, and taking your time and being careful. Uncharted, you just start and I'm just like running towards the middle and I'm taking cover, which is important, but you are not like stealthily listening for like the sounds here and there. And so it's really fascinating to see like it's really, really well done. I like it. And it's I guess the point I'm trying to make is I'm really impressed with how much their single player transfers to the multiplayer in both cases and results in similar experiences. Whereas you have something like Assassin's Creed, where their PvP multiplayer, they had to modify significantly from the single player in order to make it an interesting experience. And so it's interesting to see the other way, where it's like, hey, we can pretty much just take this single player experience into multiplayer and it retains all the best attributes and it's really fun. That's great.
You just mentioned AC multiplayer, and we talked about that quite extensively the last time you were on, so I don't want to touch on that too much. But now that Syndicate's out, and we've had a year that doesn't have co-op, and it doesn't have a full multiplayer either, has your mind changed on AC multiplayer at all? On maybe if you'd like to return?
No, I mean, I still do want to see it return, but I also want to see, see it tackled from the ground up. And I'm talking more about the PvP than the co-op. I think they did a pretty good job on co-op. It's not my thing, really, though. Fundamentally, I think this series is a single player series, and Syndicate was great. I don't think it felt like it was missing anything for me, really, but I do think that there's an opportunity with Assassin's Creed multiplayer to make something really unique and, just like the original was. And I mean, obviously there's other games that are kind of similar, like The Ship and all that stuff, right? But like, for a mainstream AAA budget game, they have the opportunity to do something really, really crazy and fascinating. And I just would love to see it someday. I have no idea if I ever will, but it's pretty much unchanged, yeah.
What did you think of Far Cry 4?
Oh, Far Cry 4. The gameplay is really solid. I love the Shangri-La sections. I thought the art style and direction and everything in that was really cool. And now that I'm seeing the Far Cry Primal stuff, it seems like it's almost like the Shangri-La stuff was a precursor to the Primal stuff in a way.
Yeah.
Because, you don't really have guns. You have bow and arrow, even if it gets like kind of crazy near the end, and you're commanding your little kitty cat to go like attack people, right?
Yeah.
And so I really love that part. The main Far Cry, the main storyline and stuff, I was kind of meh about. I thought visually it was really beautiful. I think they did a really good job with the environments and everything. I did like that the 2 characters, what are their games? Like, what are their names? The ones that you choose between. Is it Amita and Shabal?
Yeah,
something close to that. I do kind of like that they don't make it an easy choice between them.
Oh, that was so brutal. Yeah, those choices.
They're both really horrible people. And like usually when you get when you get a chance to make a choice like this, they usually kind of split it like, and here's the good choice, and here's the you're an asshole choice, and like,
and then after you have done it, that's like, actually you were the asshole all along. Nice
Yeah.
work. Like,
Yeah.
I remember one of them's like, go blow up this factory or go farm some opium. And I was like, what? I don't want to do either of those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so I really, really liked. I didn't like the characters that much, but I really liked that they made the choice not an easy, like, straightforward one. I didn't really like how after you do that, the other one comes to you and they're like, "Did you know there were orphans in that factory you blew up? Now they're all dead," like
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that. And I'm like, "Oh, fuck you, game. If I had chosen the other way, you would have been like, and then like you just like blew up the cure, like you just." We could have made the cure for cancer with those drugs. Like, whatever, you're gonna shit on me, like, no matter what choice I make. Don't act like you're all like right now, just telling me, like, trying to shame me. You would have shamed me the other way too. I didn't like that aspect of that, and I thought Pagan Min was decent as a bad guy. He wasn't as good as I hoped, and he's used a little too sparingly. I think, like, it just
What about compared to Voss of the Far Cry 3?
but I love Far Cry 3, and like the gameplay is pretty similar. And so Far Cry 3, I think, Far Cry 3 had that element of kind of. I like Far Cry 3's story a lot more, and I mean, I love Jeffrey's writing, even though I don't think Far Cry 3's story hit the mark that he was thinking he was aiming for. There was still enough interesting things going on in there that I just really. I think it's extremely hard to top Voss, and I don't think Pagan Min did that. And it's just there's kind of like a surreal quality to Far Cry 3 where you're not 100% sure if you can trust what you're seeing a lot of times, especially with Voss, if you know what I mean. Like,
Oh, yeah.
so I don't know how much in the spoilers we're talking about, but like Jeffrey's, a lot of things that people criticize it for being like the white savior type narrative or whatever. Like Jeffrey puts that so in your face. It's like you don't know if he's being serious or not. Or I mean, like, like when I was playing through it, and Jeffrey's talked about it. He's like, it's supposed to be like kind of like a satire of this kind of thing, but I don't know. It's also hard but it's also almost like a straight up implementation of a lot of these tropes. And at which point you ask, how does this become satire? Right? Because so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in Far Cry 3's story that I love, that it makes me think about it, even if I don't think the overall thing works exactly as well as Jeffrey might have been hoping for. I think, at least, it's the impression I get from interviews I've seen him do on the story, and he's been like a little combative sometimes, in that, because people seem to interpret it one way, and he's like, no, that was the whole point, and then people are like, I can't believe this guy, he's so arrogant, and like all this stuff, and I'm just like, this is hilarious. But I'm an unabashed fan of Jeffrey's writing, and then Far Cry 3 is definitely included in that.
Onto some Assassin's Creed. You also played through the third, oft-forgotten Assassin's Creed game written by our Lord and Savior, Bloodlines. Was this your first time playing through Bloodlines? I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, first time playing through Bloodlines, originally released for the PSP alongside AC2 in 2009. It had gotten kind of not great reviews, and even though I had a PSP, I was like, I hadn't reached peak fandom yet either, right? Because this is right when AC2 was coming out, right? And I think by the time Brotherhood is when I was really just sealed. It was like, oh my god, this is the best series.
Yeah.
And I just never had I never had a desire to come back to Bloodlines. I mean, I read up on what happened so that Revelations would, so that I have some more background for Revelations since it builds on that. But then, I had the opportunity I saw it was on sale for $5 on PlayStation Network, and that you could play it through the Vita, but not any of the consoles. But then, as it turns out, the PS TV was like $30 or something because they've discounted them so much. And it was compatible with that. And I'm like, I could very conceivably, like buy this game for $35 in a way because, you're buying the console that goes with it and stream it. And I think it would be really interesting. Like, I think I'd enjoy that more than if I just tried to sit down and play it by myself because it's so aged and, it's the least technically advanced AC that still tries to do a standard AC formula, right? Like, we're not talking about like discovery side-scrolling stuff or whatever. This tries to be an Assassin's Creed game in an open world, like in a city. And it's like, but what if you had to do that on the PS2?
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating, like from a historical perspective. I think
I couldn't manage to view all of the streams because I've been so busy. But how was the writing, particularly? Because it is, of course, written by our Lord and Savior, Darby McDevitt. What did you think? Did it stand out to you as being uniquely Darby, like Revelations and AC4? Was there some kind of buddy companion who later dies in it?
Yeah, no, not really. No, I don't think it. I think there's a lot of technical limitations that really hinder the storytelling. Well, also probably budget and time, I think, as well. That I think if I didn't know that this Darby wrote this game, I don't think I would have said, you know what, I think Darby might have written this. I don't think I would have gotten that out of it. It's very light on story, I think, overall. And I don't know. I think the game is very interesting and decent for what it is, but it pretty much was about how I expected it to be all these years when I was avoiding playing it. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It's not a masterpiece by any means, but it's interesting. And, you know, there is some very significant plot stuff that happens, you know, with Altair and Maria, although not as much as I expected. I expected them to be full on in love by the end, but they're actually not. They're just kind of agreeable with each other now. But like, yeah, no, I think it's fascinating as like a historical relic, but beyond that, it's okay.
Yeah. In your second interview with Jeffrey Harlem, I actually learned about what kind of restrictions can be put on writers. I guess I'd never considered that before, that like in Dead Kings, Jeffrey could only write like 12 pages of script, which is insanely small. So I guess that with such a small priority kind of game, that we really shouldn't be expecting some kind of glorious Darby AC4 level writing in it.
Oh God, no. Yeah, no, not Revelations either. It's, I mean, they don't have the budget, the technology, or like anything. Like the cutscenes are all very short and to the point, and there's not a whole lot of depth to. They don't have any philosophical ruminations on things, and it's really more just like, hey, here's kind of the outline of what happens after AC1 with Altair, and not too in depth with it. But I mean, it's pretty good. And actually, I like the Altair voice actor, who is not Cass Anvar or Philip Shabazz.
What?
But he is closer to Cass's. Like he has kind of like an accent, and he talks similar to how Cass does Altair. And I think he does a pretty good job. Actually, it's interesting to hear that.
So you mentioned that there isn't a lot of like philosophical ponderance in it.
Not really.
But a big part of your most recent interview with Jeffrey Harlem is that, well, at least what stood out to me as being a big part of it was that in total, Ubisoft really wants to kind of cut down on the amount of cutscenes, the length of cutscenes, and the amount of philosophy in it. As you're someone who really plays and kind of recognizes that kind of philosophy and kind of plays for the story a bit, what did you think of that? You didn't really comment on it while you were talking to him.
What do I think about it? In what way? About how they're paring it down a bit?
Yeah, because there's already it's very sparing in the philosophy at the moment.
Yeah, already. I don't know. I don't think I think some people got the wrong impression from when I brought that up in the discussion, as I've tried to clarify, like in topics here and there. Some people, like the actual thing I was trying to get a little more into on that is what is going on with the maxim of the creed, because I think like the impression I get is that they're literally like forbidding writers to use it or marketing to use it anymore. And I'm not sure if it's like a legal thing or like what. And I was trying to see if maybe Jeffrey could kind of hint at it. He's like, oh, you know, like Abstergo has like, I don't know what it is. That I was a little more interested in that. And some people were like, oh, they don't need to say the words every time. It's like cliche. I'm like, no. But what I enjoy about that is that a lot of the best philosophical discussions have come out of examining that phrase. I don't need to hear it just for the sake of lip service. I want people to talk about it. Like, you know, whether it's Ezio explaining it to Sophia or the progression of Edward's understanding of that line through AC4, of his understanding of the maxim of the creed is one of like the biggest signs of progression that his character makes. So it's kind of a little more focused on that. I don't think every game needs to have like a big discussion about it. I think, like Jeffrey said, they were going to try to do it more in gameplay in Syndicate rather than verbally talking about
Which
it.
I could definitely respect.
Yeah, and I think if things had worked out, if they had gone through with like the original vision on that, and actually modified the gameplay in the way that they were talking about, made the effects of Jacob's actions more clear, and then the philosophies and their the practical applications of those philosophies and the benefits and drawbacks of each one become apparent if you want to look, if you dig into it, right? And I think that's totally fine. Like, I just don't think Syndicate did a really great job of that in its final state, when Jacob breaks stuff, but it has no impact on the player at all, and you immediately fix it up as Evie, and everything is just like back to normal, and you've gotten rid of the bad guy. Because at that point, it's just like a very standard story where you just, London's ruled by Templars. They're bad. Let's get rid of them. Okay, now they're gone and everybody's happy. Like, I thought it was really interesting how they started to poke at Jacob's actions having consequences in ways that very few assassins have. You've seen with other assassins and other stories, but they needed to go all the way, in my opinion, and do the things that they were talking about, like removing fast travel when you disrupt the transportation industry, and making shit really expensive when you collapse the financial markets. And like, that makes a very clear argument to like, oh, we do really actually need some measure of control for these systems and order. And it's like, oh God, am I talking about being a Templar? Like I think that's really cool. I don't think it really played out well in Syndicate. So that's what I think these philosophies are part of the core of the franchise. Well, I mean, they are core to the franchise, and it's like they're one of the few things that are common to all of the assassins and their stories, right? It's a story, like there's stories about how each of them applies those philosophies and the impacts that it has on their different time periods and cultures and everything. And like, I just don't want that to be lost, I just, that's what I'm afraid of, is because the series is really interesting, and like, if you look at the individual stories bit by bit, but like, it becomes really powerful once you tie them all together, and not necessarily in explicit ways, because that can feel too contrived after a while, like having everybody be the descendant of everyone else or something like that.
Yeah.
But like, if you just look at like the way that the philosophies evolve and when they're applied and when they work and when they don't, like, I think that's really cool. And I just don't want that to be lost in the stories. So we'll see. I mean, I had some issues with Syndicate in that regard, but I can kind of see where they were going for with it. And Unity is fairly heavy, actually, on like the old rituals and.
Well, it established there being an assassin council, which is the first time that was mentioned, and it's been used ever since.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of political stuff in Unity that's interesting too. So I'm not like saying it's disappearing, and I'm just, it's starting to look like it might be disappearing a little bit. I just don't want that to be lost, but I don't think it'll ever be truly lost, I think.
I just wanted to touch on real quick, what did you actually think of Syndicate? Like, you mentioned on Twitter that it's up there with AC2 and AC4.
Yeah.
But could you extrapolate on a little bit? Like,
yeah, no, it's in my top 3. I think it's definitely one of the. I kind of started. You guys were talking on the last episode. I remember how it's hard to rank, how to actually enumerate each of the titles necessarily. Yeah. And for me, I might even take one step back to the point where I'm like, I basically throw the Assassin's Creed games in a good bucket and a bad bucket.
Yeah.
And like, the bad ones still have a lot of merits. Like, I put AC3 in there, but I love AC3 too. But it's not one of the good ones, I don't think. There's a lot of stuff they tried for and didn't execute very well. And so it's definitely one of the good ones. It's probably in my top 3. I thought the story was really well written. The characters I loved. And it is what it is. It's like, as Jeffrey said, a buddy comedy. It's funny. London itself is beautiful and immersive. And I was saying this in the other podcast I recorded recently for the Kill Connor Club with lasers and dynamite. But like, what? And actually, there might be a little overlap in this section here, so I won't go too in depth about my thoughts on Syndicate. But like, I think if you can, when the AC games nail the city and the feeling of immersion, that goes a long way to me loving the game. Like, I can forgive a lot of stuff if they can nail that. And I think they did a fantastic version of London in Syndicate. Even if it's not like 100% historically accurate, it's believable in its own world, you know. And it's I really loved it. I'm really happy that the game turned out better than I was even like I was just hoping for, like, oh god, just don't tank the franchise after Unity. Like,
Yeah.
because I was a little worried about Quebec's handling of it, because I wasn't super impressed with Tyranny of King Washington and Freedom Cry, honestly. Like, I think they both did some interesting things, but they didn't really feel like Assassin's Creed games to me, as I mentioned, I think, last time I was on the podcast. But, like, to their credit, I think, you know, they and the other studios that worked on it knocked it out of the park. I think they delivered a really great game that I have some quibbles here and there with, but the stuff that I love overwhelms that, and I'm really happy. It's, you know, it's just that feeling as a fan, like when you know, they release the title, it's like, oh, thank God, it's good. Like, it's what we wanted, pretty much, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such a relief, because these days, like, you don't, like, you know, I've come to accept that Assassin's Creed is no longer a series that it's not reliable to assume that each title is going to be excellent anymore, unfortunately. And so I was relieved to find that Syndicate was excellent.
Now, perhaps you would have finished it by the time this is up, but you are currently playing through Jack the Ripper. Now, we won't talk about story or anything like that, but what have you thought about it so far, gameplay, side mission wise?
Well, so this is something that's kind of interesting to me, because I talked a little bit with Steven Totilo at the very end of our podcast, where it's developed by Ubisoft Montpellier, who developed the Rayman games, Beyond Good and Evil, and I think Zombie U as well, and all these games that are kind of more and I said kind of like artistic / almost indie-like in Ubisoft's portfolio. You know, they're not like the huge big budget games. They're more the artsy, like, hey, we're gonna make these really critically acclaimed different games that and so I was a little disappointed when Dead Kings came out, and it was their first time tackling the AC franchise, and it turned out to be kind of I don't know, not that different, not as different as I would have thought them to make it. Whereas Jack the Ripper, I think it feels like they had a little more of a budget and maybe more experience with the franchise, to where I think, like, a lot of the fear stuff in the gameplay is interesting, and it's a little bit more out there in the way that I was kind of hoping / expecting for with Dead Kings. And so I am probably like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. And I do like that they got some black box assassinations in there, and it's cool that they have all these side activities. I wasn't really expecting those things, so I like that too. I don't know if there's much else we can talk about without kind of spoiling like the first part of the DLC, which I'm happy to if we want to give a disclaimer, or otherwise we can not talk about it. But
I don't think we need to talk about it just yet.
Okay, that's fine.
But I thought the story justification for the fear tactics and things like that for Evie are very interesting, because like she's been in India for the last wee while. One thing that's really interesting to me is that a lot of people think that she's using some kind of fear toxin or fear gas scarecrow style.
Yeah, scarecrow.
But like to me, when I saw her using her karas, the little rings, it just looks like fire, which definitely rings more India to me than some kind of fear gas. So it's interesting that there's two people who either think it's fire or who think it's some kind of fear toxin gas thing, scarecrow style.
Yeah. Well, I think the argument, and the reason I also think it would probably be some kind of like gas and not just like some stylistic fire or something, is that you get fear bombs, right? And those seem to pretty clearly release gas when they explode. And it seems to be the same as what she uses when she melees and does those like brutal assassinations and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. The fear stuff is interesting, and I do like that for Evie. It's not lethal, you know. Like when she uses the spike, even though they call it brutal assassination, she just kind of like pins the guy's arm down.
Yeah, and
I appreciate that it's not actually her mutilating people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like how they handled that. But one thing I will say that I'm having a little bit of a hard time with, without really getting into, it's not really a spoiler or anything, but it's structured very much like in the similar way to the main game, where Jack the Ripper is kind of like a new Starrick, not necessarily like in what he actually does, but in terms of like he's like kind of the head of an organization almost, and that doesn't feel right to me.
One of the things that was strangest to me, and I actually pointed out and I asked you to check out the database for, is that Jack obtained the rooks.
Oh yeah, the fact
that kind of just annoyed me. It was like, really? We recruited these guys 20 years ago. I spent, like 80 hours making sure they were all right, and suddenly some dickhead in a bag comes along, and they're all like, oh yeah.
Well, so for me, it's less about, I think that's actually kind of a cool twist on it, but like the thing that bothers me more about it is just how much it doesn't really jive with actual history. You know what I mean? Because I don't think anybody out there has any theories that Jack was working as like that he had this whole like army at his command, or not even an army, but even other people like associates or whatever. Like he was just this fucked up guy who did some really fucked up things, and I'm not even sure I'm still comfortable with them tackling this as a DLC. But like it feels so removed from from who Jack the Ripper was that it's actually kind of straining the bounds of believability a little bit too much for me, where it's like you're taking him on almost in the same way you take Cesare or Starrick on, you know what I mean? It's like, oh well, this person is Jack's eyes and ears, and I'm like, didn't Jack just find prostitutes and like fucking kill them and remove their organs? Like he's not I don't know. He's not like this mob boss or something, Like that's the one thing about Jack the Ripper so far that I'm kind of like, I'm having a really hard time getting on board with this part of it. I don't know, but we'll see. I still need to finish it, as you know.
Yeah. The marketing didn't really show any of this either, which I was surprised about. They only showed us like following him through an alleyway and stuff like that.
So there's a lot of stuff the marketing didn't show, and I just want to say, hey, marketing, like this is all really fucking cool that you guys try to keep surprises, but whoever is in charge of your trophies needs to like understand that those get leaked before it comes out, because once again they have some really cool thing that happens like in the beginning of the game that they obviously were trying to keep like a secret, but like I already knew about it because the Jack the Ripper trophies came out and people just can't shut the fuck up on Twitter or like on my live streams. And so like just after the World War I stuff, it's like, guys, please look at your trophies before before they go out. And if there's something in there that you're trying to keep a secret, consider rewording it.
Just a little more vague would go
a little more vague, because it's kind of maddening after the World War I thing. But then again, they also labeled it World War I on the minimap, so I can't really complain too much. As I discussed with Jeffrey, we had a big chat about this, so I'm not going to get into it, but it was a little frustrating.
Oh, yeah, I love that chat. That was so interesting to me. It was definitely a great talk on game design as a whole, and like the two schools of thought on that kind of approach. I really like that.
Yeah. And I also just appreciate Jeffrey saying like, oh yeah, and like usually I go through the trophies and I make sure they're intentionally vague, but I didn't get to do that this time. And I was like, oh well.
Last time you were on, we talked a lot about modern day, and a lot of it was really negative. And I don't necessarily regret that, because I think that was very representative of the community at the time, that kind of negativity, just like after Unity, like, what are they doing with this modern day? But there will be spoilers for Jack the Ripper's Modern Day, which is only Assassin Intels in this little discussion. So I just wanted to know what you thought of Syndicate's approach to the modern day, and what you thought about its inclusion in Jack the Ripper.
Well, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that they threw some intel files in Jack the Ripper. For Syndicate itself, it was about what I expected, which is that there is more substance to the story in terms of what happens, but it's still, non-interactive. It's you're still you, which I still hate. For reasons that we talked about last time. And I'm still just not super engaged in it. I was okay, so at this point, right, like full spoilers for Syndicate's Modern Day, I was very sad to see Rebecca get hurt, potentially killed, who knows at this point. And one thing I do appreciate is that I know a lot of people were asking before my Modern Day podcast got shut down by Abstergo, a lot of people were asking about the fates of various characters, and a lot of this assassin intel in Jack the Ripper answers some of those. A good
Yeah.
chunk of those for people, which I think they'll appreciate. But they still notably leave Rebecca up in the air, although it sounds like it might lean more towards that she's alive. But at the end of the day, it's still just like a really short movie. And the intel, I did appreciate how much stuff was, all the stuff about Consus and the Shroud, and all of that was really cool in the intel files. But you're just listening to tapes and you're reading text. And like I had this problem by the end of Metal Gear Solid 5 as well. I'm like, God damn it, this is a game. Like if you really want to make this special, you need to play to the strengths of your medium. Otherwise, I'm going to hold you to the same standards that I do every other audiobook out there, every other short film out there, every other movie out there, because that's all you're giving me. And like in the context of that, these stories aren't that great. They're not particularly well acted or directed if you compare it to the best of those mediums, and what really should be happening for the modern day is playing to the strengths of things that you can only do in video games. And this is what I was saying about like last time. One of my favorite moments is in the entire series is the very end of Brotherhood when Juno forces Desmond to stab Lucy because you as a player are right there with Desmond, like literally unable to do anything else than stab her. And it dawns on you the same time it dawns on Desmond what is happening. And it's just so it's an amazing moment and a really frustrating one if you love those characters.
It could have easily been in a cutscene, but as you just described,
but
I
it
think
wouldn't
it
be
would
the same. Exactly.
The same.
And so that's why I'm still kind of just that's one of the big reasons I'm still just like I'm happy I think this stuff is really cool with the Shroud and Consus and seeing Juno again and seeing I'm happy to see next gen models of Rebecca and Sean, and I love these characters, but at the same time it's like it's not what the modern day could be, and as long as it continues to be that, I'm going to just always be just kind of mad about the whole thing. And if eventually they surprise me, I'll be surprised, but I'm not expecting it to be great. And it's still not great in my opinion. And we'll see what happens in the future. But that, and I'm still insanely sick. At least, I mean, I'm still really sick of playing as quote unquote me because I still have no anchor to. I've been playing different forms of me since the multiplayer of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how many me's are there out there? Which ones are supposed to be like
the same me?
The same me, or are they different me's? And it still leads to really awkward things where they just literally because you don't have a voice, it leads to really awkward cutscenes and stuff where characters are just spouting exposition and talking at you and not actually having a conversation, because all you can do is just be silent. And at least it's an improvement from before. At least they're not calling you names anymore, but that doesn't say a whole lot, you know? And so there's still a lot of fundamental narrative issues I have and with the modern day that haven't really changed, but I'm at least happy to see the plot moved forward, but I'm still very not into the modern day as much as last time, pretty much.
Well, you just read the Ripper intels, and to me, it definitely sounds like they're getting rid of the initiate system and the whole me. That's what it sounded like to me.
That was really fascinating to read, actually, I think. For one, because they talk about how one of your me's was killed off. Kind of funny. And I'm like, those fuckers, they killed me off. Typical Abstergo. They're like, oh, our initiate who is in Abstergo Entertainment is dead now, and I'm like, God damn it. No, but in a joking way, because I have no emotional attachment to that person, whatever that was whatsoever. Yeah. And it just points out how ridiculous this whole setup is when you can read about yourself being killed off in an intel file. Yeah. And then, they're like, at the end, they're like, you know what, fuck initiates. They're not assassins. And I always, back in 2012 or whatever, I think when initiates was really getting worked up, or was between 2012 and 2013, I think, when a lot of that stuff was developed with the initiates, right? Yeah. And I found it really fascinating. I didn't really engage with the site a lot, but I read Access the Animus. They did a really awesome summary of what was going on in Initiates and everything. And it was confusing for me, even as like a hardcore fan of the series, where it's like, okay, they're Initiates. Initiates has the Assassin's crest in its logo. Initiate is commonly the first rank of the Assassin Order, but you're telling me that the Initiates are a fourth group outside of both, well, not just both, but amongst the Templars, the modern day Templars, modern day Assassins, Erudito, who we still didn't know that much about at that point, but was some sort of faction, right?
Yeah.
And now you're introducing a fourth group of people that is easily confused for the Assassins in many ways. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? I mean, I liked some of the story plots, but I was like, this is really confusing. Made even more confusing when they basically did fold the Initiates into the Assassins, right? Like,
Yeah.
but then they're not full Assassins.
They're not full Assassins, but they're kind of allied with the Assassins.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we have like an alliance with the Assassins. I'm like, you guys are making this way too complex for something that gets like 10 minutes of lip service every game. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm reading all of this and I'm like, the general public out there does not give two shits about what is going on. They would be so confused at this point as to the split between all these different factions. And like, I was shaking my head a little bit at how it was structured up, and I'm like, this is crazy. And so I'm not gonna lie, I'm like really happy to see these modern day intel files in Jack the Ripper that are basically like, okay, you know what, Initiates, we had a good run, but you're not Assassins, you're never gonna be Assassins, we're gonna cut you loose, and maybe we'll come back to you. It's almost very meta, like I almost feel like it's like it's a Ugoogly, as Derek Zoolander, for the Initiates website and product, but like it's almost like they took that and made it an intel file for the Initiates the Initiates in the game. Is almost sounds like they could be talking about both Initiates the product and literally the Initiates in the game. So I am, for one, happy that they are simplifying this. And I think the bigger thing that fascinates me about this is that I think the obvious question that comes from them killing off this, like, from them basically saying like, hey, we're not going to talk to you anymore, pretty much, bye-bye Initiate type stuff, is along the lines of, okay, well, what's the modern day going to be like for the next game then? Because the past two games have been from the perspective of Initiates, and the AC4 and Rogue stuff was kind of Initiate stuff, although not really. I don't understand.
It wasn't Initiates, but it was also me.
Yeah, and so it almost makes me wonder, like, oh, so it almost feels like they're closing off that, like they're bookending this a little bit, and I almost wonder if in the next game we will actually see what people have been asking for, which is a playable third-person protagonist who actually has, like a personality and can have realistic conversations and gameplay and shit. Like, I am really interested. That's the most fascinating thing for me that comes out of the Jack the Ripper intel files, is that there's almost like a promise here of, hey, we're going to shake things up. Because, like for the next game, as far as like the modern day goes, because, Syndicate was better, but it was still fundamentally like Unity's modern day, right? Yeah. And this makes it sound like that's not going to be the case for the next one. So we'll see. I don't know.
Mr. Loomer, if that is really your name, have you ever heard of 6 Degrees of Separation to Kevin Bacon?
Yep, absolutely.
I decided to try to find out if that was true for me. Would you like to hear it?
You mean 6 degrees of aftermath, basically?
I think it's still to Kevin Bacon, so I think 50.
It's... from you to Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
I see. Okay. I thought you had made up your own thing for you, like you were the Kevin Bacon of the AC.
No, I'm not. Actually, we should do that. We should try and connect everyone in the AC community. I think we could do that. I think we could.
Yeah, I think that by definition of the community, that's probably really easy to do.
Yeah, since everyone's either on YouTube or on Reddit or the Ubisoft forums. Okay.
Anyway.
Right.
All right, let's hear it.
So this applies to me, and just to him, this also apply basically the same path to you, okay? So,
yeah, since I can just be like, oh, I did a podcast with Aftermath. That's my connection.
Except it's with UB Gabe, and you've met UB Gabe as well.
Oh, okay.
So, I met Gabe Graziani in Montreal. Gabe works with is Isaiah Aymar, who was working on the AC movie with Michael Fassbender, and Michael Fassbender was in X-Men First Class with Kevin Bacon. Boom.
Oh, nice. That's right.
I don't know how easy that would have been before the movie was being worked on, but because of the movie,
a little trickier.
because of the movie, it's a lot easier now because we have Michael Fassbender, and Michael Fassbender's been in everything. Yeah. So, and then you, of course, can be supplanted into the section where I am because you know Gabe quite well.
Yeah, it's like the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
So, to wrap this all up, where can everyone find you and your work, Salooms?
Oh, yeah, of course. YouTube.com/Loomer is my YouTube channel, which is kind of the hub for everything. And if not, then Twitter. I'll announce stuff on Twitter at twitter.com/Loomer979. I know how URLs work. Yeah. And I have a Facebook page, but since I hate Facebook, I don't usually post on it all that much. But you can also go there, facebook.com/Loomer979, where they're regularly like, oh, do you want people to actually see our posts? Why don't you pay us money?
Yeah. Do you have any conventions lined up where everyone can see you?
Oh, I don't know if they want. Well, I don't know. Just that idea kind of. I have met like one or two people here and there when I visit like pilgrimage stuff, and then I met Arshak, who is one of my live stream regulars at PlayStation Experience that I just recently went to.
Yeah, so you've never met anyone at any of the stuff, like.
Oh no, I don't do like meetups or something where it's like, oh hey, what? Who wants to come meet the one and only Loomer?
Oh man, you should.
But I mean, if people do actually want to say hi at stuff, I'm totally open to it. You can just tweet me and let me know. I'm totally happy to hang out if we'll be at the same place. It's just the basic idea of it still sounds hilarious to me. And, like people actually. Sorry, as far as conventions go, I don't think for upcoming ones, PAX East is off the table. I think going to hang around. I almost always go to PAX Prime and E3. Might look into Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, if we can get if Candace and I can get tickets. Other than that, it's tough. But if I am going to something, I'll probably post on Twitter. Although sometimes I won't post until I'm actually there. But
all right.
Yeah.
So basically, Twitter for everything related to what you're doing.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a good place to keep tabs on what's going on.
Do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about? Like, when can people expect the Pilgrimage Paris videos in the new year?
So for those of you that have been following Pilgrimage Paris, I once again apologize. It's taken a while for me to work with it. I'm just a little burnt out on Unity, I think, still, because it was so disappointing on so many levels, and I'd have to replay a decent chunk of it to get footage for it. But I will start the process since I'm hanging out here at home for home, meaning the apartment where I am with Candace right now. Over the holidays, I'll have some time to get started in that. I'm feeling a lot more rejuvenated and ready to dive into it. So I don't think you would see I think February is probably the best bet for those episodes. Maybe January if I manage to get through some of it. But I want to be able to release them weekly. Have enough work done to release them weekly once I start.
Yeah.
And it'll be, probably like 3 episodes, I'm thinking, maybe something like that. And then in the middle of that, I'm also working on a special Assassin's Creed 4 video that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I wanted to have it out last year for Edward's birthday, which is in March, early March. And I'm looking to do that this year instead. So I'm trying to wrap up a couple more podcasts for Syndicate. Victoria Atkin, who plays Evie, will be on in January. Maybe Austin Wintory, if he wants to be on it. And
I think he will want to be. He's great. Everyone should follow Austin Wintory on Twitter.
Austin's great. Like we were chatting because I was helping him with the Google thing earlier. But I asked him and he hasn't replied yet, so maybe I'll bug him again and see. I would love to talk to him, but so maybe a couple more Syndicate podcasts in the next month or two as well. And that's pretty much going to be a pretty full plate for me for the next, from January to March as far as videos go, along with my weekly Saturday Assassin's Creed live streams, which are a lot of fun if you haven't stopped by.
And your other live streams, don't want to plug the other ones?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have a huge backlog of video games that a lot of it has kind of sat by when I got sucked into Assassin's Creed Brotherhood multiplayer. And so some of these are really old games. Some of them are more recent too. But in the video description of my live streams, I have a whole schedule. And I'm playing through the Uncharted series for the first time, starting Uncharted 3 this Sunday. Playing through Sherlock Holmes Crimes and Punishments, which is more similar to Assassin's Creed Syndicate's dreadful crimes than I kind of expected. We even had a case where we were talking about Minerva and Juno,
Ooh.
and there was a puzzle in that one that was almost exactly like the Mayan puzzles from that Edward would do in AC4. It was very kind of crazy a little bit, actually. Doing that and like Red Dead Redemption, which I hadn't played before, stuff like that. So I play those at various points throughout the week. If you subscribe to my channel on Twitter, you'll keep up with those. But my channel is still very much an Assassin's Creed channel.
Okay.
And that's always going to be the main focus of it. But this has been my way of kind of exploring the live streaming space, since it's what I work on at work, and I have had a ton of fun. There's this nice little community of people, and it allows me to interact with people who it allows me to interact with quote unquote fans. This feels weird saying that, but like the community that I've built kind of around my videos, or the Assassin's Creed community in general, that I don't usually get to interact with them on like regular videos. You might reply to a comment, but it's different with live streams, and so I've been really enjoying that. It's been really cool. And like I said, when I do stuff like I stream Bloodlines, Assassin's Creed Bloodlines, it's a much better experience for me, I think, to do that. I find it way more interesting to do that with the community than with just me sitting there and being like, wow, this game's old. Yeah. But yeah.
You can find me everywhere as Aftermath1231. You can send me an email at Animus Island podcast@gmail.com. I'm pretty sure if that isn't right, I'll fix that. Full timestamps are in the description. There's a link to Loomer in the description as well. I believe that I will see you next week.